Good afternoon. Welcome to Long Live Third Parties Podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., a third parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bichard. Today I read the case Beaulieu versus Mack, 788 and W2D 892, Minnesota, Supreme Court, 2010. Friends, like you heard about in the name of the case, we're going to talk about Minnesota. So if you are from Minnesota, if you live in Minnesota, if you've lived in Minnesota, stick around. If you lived elsewhere, stick around too, because this will pertain to your life. Yes, this case comes from Minnesota, and it discusses a third party I never heard about. Interestingly, I lived in Minnesota at that time, 2010. I lived in Minnesota from 2004 to 2012. So this third party in this case was one I never heard of. So let's find out what party this was. It says, quote, "The issue presented in this case is whether Respondent K. Mack, the Ballot County Auditor, properly rejected petition nominating petitioner Nicole Beaulieu as a candidate of the Minnesota Warriors for Justice Party for State Representative, House District 4A. On June 1st, 2010, Beaulieu filed a nominating petition bearing 556 signatures. Respondent Mack rejected 200 of the signatures on the petition, leaving Beaulieu 150 signatures short of the 500 signatures required for a valid nominating petition under Minnesota Statute number 204B.08, subdivision 3, 2008, end quote. The Warriors for Justice Party. How did I not hear of that party? I vote a lot, almost every election. That's something I value, so I put an emphasis on myself to vote. Therefore, I wonder how I did not hear about this party when I lived in Minnesota. Have any of you heard about this party? Let me know what they stand for. Are they leftist in nature, rightist in nature, centrist, none of the above? What are they like? I'd love to know. I applaud Nicole Beaulieu for not running under the Democratic Party, or the Republican Party for that matter. Unfortunately, some of these signatures were deemed invalid, and therefore she couldn't get on the ballot, so she challenges. Let's see what it says. It says, quote, "Of the 556 signatures on Beaulieu's nominating petition, the county auditor determined that 207 signatures were defective for one reason or another. 43 of the addresses given were outside the legislative district. 140 signatures listed as the resident's address, a P.O. box office rather than a street number. 19 listed no residential address or a defective residence address, and 5 were defective for other reasons. Eliminating these 207 signatures left Beaulieu with 549 valid nominating signatures, 151 signatures short of the 500 signatures required for the valid nominating petition." End quote. So friends, do you think these are valid reasons to deny signatures? Or do you perhaps think it would depend on the case and you have to examine it yourself? What do you think? It saddens me she couldn't get on the ballot. So I wish she could have. She sounds like somebody we need on the ballot. Our friend here, Beaulieu, has some arguments she's using why this is an issue. She says one is she deems this unconstitutional because the two parties don't have to do it, but the third party is doing it. Also, she says the state is discriminating against her because of her Native American background. Unfortunately, they did not hold these arguments valid. They said that no, this law doesn't favor the two parties. Over the two parties. They talk about how a ballot access law is bad if it, quote, freezes the ballot status quo. Freeze the political status quo, end quote. They say this does not do that. Maybe you think it does. They also say because the signature is so low in Minnesota, 500, that she can't argue this is a hassle. It's so low. So do you think 500 is low? Do you think 500 is a reasonable number and maybe she shouldn't do that? We're going to give Below a benefit of the doubt and say she is right, that 500 is too high. And she is right in her argument. They say there's no evidence here the state discriminated against her because of her racial background. Ultimately, they deny it. They say the following, quote, in sum, we hold that in rejecting Bellot's nominating petition for lack of sufficient signatures, County Auditor Mack did not violate either Minnesota law or Bellot's constitutional rights. Petition denied, end quote. Nicole Beaulieu, you did a good job here. Hopefully you got on the ballot in years after 2010. Let's hope. Keep doing what you're doing, and we shall continue to be inspired by this. Long live third parties. Goodbye.